Hey, HannahMouse1 here. In this video, I'll be making a model of myself as a child with my grandparents for my granddad's 80th birthday out of PaperMache. I started by making an armchair based off of the actual armchairs in my granddad's house. I made this out of cardboard, cutting out the appropriate shapes and gluing them together, and using small scrippy scraps of paper to strengthen the bonds and hold everything together. It was a pretty complicated shape with a lot of curves and bends that were hard to do with a rigid cardboard, so in some cases I used pieces of paper to act as the base structure, as this allowed the pieces to curve due to the flimsiness, the drawback of this being, well, the flimsiness. Because the cardboard I was using had holes in the sides that would be visible unless I used an obscene amount of paint to clog them, I had to patch these up beforehand by gluing over small pieces of tissue to seal the gaps, which also provided some more reinforcement to the slightly flimsy structure. I painted this brown using brown poster paint. I use poster paint for a lot of my work. You don't need anything expensive or fancy to make art, and poster paint adheres well to the paper mache and paper and cardboard materials that make up the bulk of my work. The only downside really is that it can be a bit translucent depending on the brand, so you might need like 1,000,001 coats to get a nice solid colour. And despite the fact that textiles is not my strong suit, for the sake of authenticity, I decided to use a red fabric to make seat cushions and padding. I started by just creating a hemmed off strip to cover the base of the chair, which I glued down with PVA glue. It really didn't want to adhere properly, but with a bit of pressure I managed to get everything to stay. I then created the main seat cushion, which was fairly straightforward. The only fiddly bit was when I needed to turn the cushion inside out to hide the ugly seams, just because the fabric was quite thick and stuff and it didn't want to bend in that way. The other cushions were a little fiddlier, like the ones for the arms of the chair, just because of how small they were. I added on the cushions to the back of the chair before using a gloss Mod Podge to give the wooden parts of a chair a nice thick glossy sheen. Maybe I should have done this before sticking it on the cushions, because I really didn't want to get any of the gloss finish onto the cushions, but I also didn't want to miss any of the wood, which would have been a lot easier to do if, there were no cushions. But the benefits of hindsight, eh? I then created a base for the whole model, starting by drawing 2 circles on a piece of cardboard and cutting them out. I glued them together to make a thicker circle because I wanted the base to be a little sturdier than a single cardboard circle would have been. And again, because the edges of the cardboard is riddled with little holes, I glued on a sheet of thin tissue to fill these out before painting the thing grey. I also cut out a circular piece of fabric to act as carpet and glued that onto the base, using excess glue around the edges to seal the fabric down. I sealed in the base with more Mod Podge and glued on the chair. I then made the paper mache figures of me and my grandparents, and like an idiot I actually lost most of the footage of me making my granddad, but don't worry, you'll get to see a bit more of the creation process for the other 2 models. At the point for this first figure that I actually have footage for, I'm already starting to add in some details in the form of clothing, sticking in the different pieces for the body together, and I used UV resin for this, and I quick dried it with my torch. I used to only use PVA glue, and that honestly works fine. If you don't have resin, it works perfectly okay without. This is just quicker. I then moved on to the model for my grandmother, who will be sitting in the chair. I started by creating all of the pieces separately, so there's a piece for the torso, the arms, the legs, etc. Once the torso piece had started to dry, and I could therefore handle it without destroying its shape, I built up some of the forms around the chest and abdomen before moving on to the head. It's hard to get any real likeness at this scale, but I think I got as good as I could given my current skill set anyway. Heads are tricky, but hands are trickier, especially when you want to consider poses and holding things, and I wanted this figure to be holding a book. I then made a mini me, and before you say anything, yes, this is a version of me as I was several years ago. This model is actually supposed to be a snapshot of the past of me as a little kid reading with my nan. My nan actually passed away when I was about 10, so this is a depiction of something that actually happened at least 8 years ago. I made all of the limbs and pieces and all that, and while those were drying, I made the book that my nan will be holding. I glued the pieces of mini me right onto the model of my nan because I wanted the pieces to fit in seamlessly and naturally. Again, I used UV resin to get everything adhered quickly and securely. I then used more paper mache for the detail work, like hiding and filling the ugly seams between the pieces of mini-me as well as mini-me's hair. I also went back to the model of my granddad and added more definition to the front of his shirt, like the strains of fabric around the buttons and the line of his collar. After that, I went and added a skirt to mini-me before adding detail to the clothing on the model of my nan, like the hems of her trousers. I then applied a few coats of gesso to the paper mache figures. Gesso is just a white paint primer that means I need less coats of my translucent poster paints to get a solid colour in place. It's really not necessary. I've made plenty of pieces without it, so don't worry if you don't have or can't afford a primer for your PaperClay figures. I then moved on to the paint job, and again, I may or may not have lost a fair bit of the footage here. However, you really don't miss much. It's just a wash, rinse, repeat process of mixing a colour and applying a coat of 10. The only thing I did miss in the footage was me using a bit of red felting wool to simulate my nan's red curly hair. What I did have footage for though was using a thin piece of wire to make my nan's glasses. I absolutely love this tiny detail well, even though it was fiddly as all hell to make. And with that, we're done. I'm super happy with how this came out, and my granddad really appreciated this sentimental present. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Like and subscribe if you did. It lets me know there's something to see more of. Join the Discord, link down below, and I'll see you next week with another video. Bye!